Good morning, everybody. So nice to see you all, even though it's through a screen. Trust you've all had a comfortable time logging in. May I now make my introduction of the speaker. You've come this morning. I'm saying this in case you have many Zoom sessions and are getting confused. You've come this morning to attend Habits of Mind conducted by Mr. James Anderson. I heard Mr. Anderson speak yesterday about the learning landscape, a very useful extended metaphor that presents learning as something the student navigates through, not learning as a syllabus we teachers must get through. Mr. Anderson is a certified speaking professional and a much sought after presenter. He's also an author, and you will find his book on the Agile Learner very helpful. But most important of all to those of us who teach and lead schools is that he is familiar with school and the classroom together with all its challenges. He's very interested in producing the thoughtful student, right? Not the exam smart student, not the right answer student, but the student who genuinely thinks and has been able to do so because his teacher, you, taught him to think. For the past 20 years, James has been working with schools to make classrooms more thoughtful places. He challenges teachers to think deeply about their own mindsets and how their beliefs are communicated to students in often subtle and unintended ways. You will find him showing you how the growth mindset combined today with habits of mind will help create a learning landscape in our classrooms and our schools. Mr. James Anderson, please.
Unmute. Go here, go to here, go to here, go to here. Hey, that was a little bit unexpected. You gotta love a smooth start, don't you? Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Miss Charles, for the introduction, and to Principals Academy for providing this opportunity to share this work with you. I am genuinely thrilled to be here. I sometimes think about the body of work that I communicate with teachers as being like my children. You know, I do the work around growth mindset, and I do the work around learning landscape and about learner agency. But this work around habits of mind, it's like your favourite child. You know, you're not meant to have a favourite child, but we kind of all do. And this for me is where it all started. The habits of mind were what I was using, what drove me in my own classroom practice, and they're what put me on the path to you here today. They took me out of the classroom and working with teachers and schools around the world, and it's been such a fantastic journey. We've learnt so much about the habits of mind since I started using them in the mid-90s, early 90s even. And I want to share some of that with you today and invite you to come on that learning journey with me next year as we delve even deeper into this work. Let me start though. Hopefully, hey, why am I getting that problem happening? That's going to be, oh, I know why. Here we go. It's all right. I'm under control today. It's funny because Miss Charles was commenting just at the start of today about the level of technology and how smoothly I use the technology, and I've mucked up twice already. So that's all right. Good start for the day. These, of course, tell me this works. Forgive me. Give me one moment to sort this out, and there we are. Got it. These, of course, are the habits of mind. There are 16 of them, and I'm hoping Joseph at the Principals Academy will be able to send you a link now if you're not familiar with these. So while we're talking about them, you can download a copy of these 16 habits of mind and have them at hand. But as I look across now to the chat box, what I'd like to see is who knows already about the habits of mind. Just type into the chat box that it's new to you. you've done a little bit or you've been working with them for a long time. So I just like to get a quick glance of, I'm entirely new to the habits of mind, I'm familiar with them, or I've worked with them a lot. So nothing, a middle, a lot. So as I look over, I can see a couple of new to me, read up on the habits of mind. I know we've got 80 or so people here, so I'm waiting for it all. I've heard from it, new to me. The chart's a bit blurry. Yes, I understand the chart's a little bit blurry. Hopefully the download that will be dropped in there soon will be much more clear. Entirely new, so people have heard a little bit, but for the most part, it seems like they're just something that we've heard about. Fine, that's a great place to start. And one step up on where I started when I began this work. What Art Costa and Bennet Kalick did. Now, Art Costa and Bennet Kalick are the authors of this work. I'll share my very well-thumbed version of one of their books here. What Art Costa and Bennet Kalick did was, through other people's research, they went and identified the behaviours of highly successful people. They looked at the best of the best in a wide range of professions and careers. Doctors, teachers, mechanics, plumbers, musicians, all these people that were in the best in their field, and they asked the question, what are you doing? When you're being so good at what you do, what is it that you're actually doing? And they identified that they were doing things like persisting, managing impulsivity, thinking flexibly, striving for accuracy, applying past knowledge to new situations. What we've now come to know as the 16 habits of mind. Originally, I think there were 8 and then 12, and now there's 16. And what they are, the way they've defined them, is the habits of mind are those dispositions, all right? They're typical patterns of behaviour. They're actions that we take. Not just once, but patterns of actions that are skillfully and mindfully employed by characteristically successful people, the sort of people that are succeeding in life, in whatever profession or domain that they're pursuing, when they're in their learning zone. Now, I'm going to touch on the different elements of that definition throughout this session this morning. But I want you to keep in mind, if you're very unfamiliar to the habits of mind, the idea here is that these are the behaviours that will help your children succeed in your classroom, in their lives, and more broadly out in the community. And not because Art Costa and Bennet Kalick sat down one day and said, how would we like students to behave? That's not how it came about. The way it came about was by looking at highly successful people and documenting what they actually did. And this is one of the things that I think makes the habits of mind so enduring. There are a lot of people out there with good ideas. Art Costa and Bennet Kalick aren't one of those. Art Costa and Bennet Kalick did not invent the habits of mind, they observed them. And so what you'll find is that in any area where you see people excelling, see people growing, see people reaching the top of their fields, you will see them engaging in these habits of mind. But, excuse me, to give you an introduction to this, I thought that it might be useful to give you some reading to take away, a resource, particularly for all of you that this is quite new to. So again, one of the things we're going to make available to you, I hope in the chat box again in just a moment, is a copy of this Habits of Mind, What You Need to Know Before You Get Started. Because one of the things that happened, and I'll expand on my story in a minute, but there's been lots and lots of schools all around the world over the last 20 or so years that have jumped on the Habits of Mind bandwagon. These schools that have been passionate and committed and resourced and saw the habits of mind go nowhere in their school. The habits of mind, a bit like growth mindset, for those of you who have been doing the work with me around mindset, while the idea is simple, you can look at that list of 16 habits of mind and go, yeah, I understand what those are. Actually implementing them, actually making a difference to student learning outcomes with the habits of mind turns out to be more complex than we thought. So in this resource that I'm providing for you, I give it to you to share with your colleagues in your school. If after today you decide to go down this path, spend some time looking through this document. Spend some time becoming familiar with what it means to really succeed with habits of mind and the right way of going about doing it. Because when you do, when you embrace the habits of mind and really implement this well, some very, very profound things can happen. I'd like to share with you now a short video. I've had the great privilege, this is one of the great honours of my life, to have worked closely with Art Costa and Benna Kalick over the last 25 or 30 years. And I was talking to Art Costa recently, and I said, look, we're developing some new tools and some new ways of working with the habits. What would you say to a school that was starting out with this work? So, very personal conversation that we're having, and I asked Art if we could share this. And listen to his words, because Art Costa, if you're not familiar with him, is often referred to as the grandfather of thinking. That he was one of the people that introduced the concept of the thinking curriculum to schools around the world. And when you hear what he has to say about how the habits of mind influence schools, I think the rest of the journey for you becomes a no-brainer. But here's Art to tell you a little bit about what he understands about the impact growth habits of mind have on schools. And Miss Charles, just so I know this is working when it plays, can you give me a little thumbs up that you can hear Art speaking when this comes on? Thank you.
Well, I think there's one thing that I would mention, and that is, and as you know, James, because you've been part of this, what we see happening in schools that have adopted the habits of mind, I think is truly phenomenal. And for example, when an entire staff and a community, including the parents, adopt a common language, so they're all talking about the same thing, and there's a sharing of events and sharing of indicators that they all share. What it does is to build a community in the school that goes beyond anything else that I've ever seen. I know that when we have in the US schools that need to be accredited, I think you do too in Australia. And when Waikiki was accredited, the accreditor said they've never seen anything like it, that the whole staff and the community were focused on the same outcomes. They spoke the same language. You could see the habits of mind repeated at every grade level in every classroom. And that unity, that consistency, that bonding of a staff is one of the most amazing and phenomenal experiences I've ever had in a school.
Wow. This from a man who is an emeritus professor and has been working with schools his whole career. He started as a teacher. The impact that habits of mind have on a school community. Just imagine if your students, your teachers, your parent community all started talking the same language, all shared a common focus on people becoming more thoughtful, of being persistent, of managing their impulsivity, listening with empathy and understanding, thinking and communicating with clarity and precision, that all these terms meant something, and that in every classroom, every student, every day, was being taught how to get better at those dispositions. One of the things that Art didn't mention about Waikiki School, which is a school that's been working with the habits of mind now for 25 years or more, is that they're almost shut. They're almost closed by the education system in Hawaii because they weren't performing very well. They shifted their focus, adopted the habits of mind, and the impact and the influence that had on the school and the school's community led it to being named one of the blue ribbon schools in the United States. This school went from almost closing to being one of the best schools in the United States. It's quite phenomenal. So how do we do that? It doesn't happen overnight, but let me tell you a little bit about my journey with the habits of mind. I was the middle years curriculum leader at a P12 school in Melbourne in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I picked up one of Art Costa and Banner Kalik's books and I read through it. And I was reading lots of things at the time. I was reading about multiple intelligences and understanding by design and all sorts of material, graphic organisers and stuff. And when I picked up the habits of mind, I just went, wow, like if we could do this, this would be amazing. Like multiple intelligence is fine, but this is what's really important. Anyway, in my great wisdom at the time, I thought there are 16 habits of mind. I'll go into my classroom, I'll teach 8 in the first week of term, 8 in the second week of term, and the kids will be good to go for the rest of the year. It turned out that didn't work. And so I started this journey of trying to work out how to make a difference with the habits of mind. And what happened was I started in my own classroom, then my own school. Then I started working with a cluster of schools around me. Then I got seconded to the Victorian Schools Innovations Commission, which is like working for the Department of Education here in Victoria in Australia. And I led a national research circle looking at how to implement habits of mind successfully. And what we found is that most schools, like me, the first thing we did was teach them. Like there were 16 of them, we went into a classroom and said, this is what they are, do this. We introduced a language around the habits of mind. And can I tell you, this was exciting. I mean, here is a picture of my classroom the first year of working with habits of mind. There they are, up on the wall. We would talk about those habits of mind every day. I would stand there and I would point to them and we'd talk about them. The students knew the language, the teachers knew the language, the parents knew the language, and it felt really, really good. And there was almost no change in student learning outcomes. I can't tell you the number of times schools have latched on to habits of mind, said, these are the habits of mind, kids, 16 of them, learn them, do them, say them. And then after a little bit of time, noticed not much has changed. The student who wasn't managing their impulsivity very well, still wasn't managing their impulsivity very well, but now they could say it. There was little changes, don't get me wrong. It's not like there was no change to learning outcomes, but the outcomes we were hoping for weren't really there. Schools then started going, well, there must be more to this. And what we tended to do was to then require students to engage in the habits of mind. We would set tasks that said, you need to be persistent. You should be managing your impulsivity. This task requires you to think flexibly. We started setting increasingly demanding tasks for students to engage in. And that was good. But if any of you were here yesterday listening to my talk about the learning landscape, I told a story that highlights this point. My English teachers in year 11 and 12 wanted me to be a better creative writer. But the only strategy they had to help me become a better creative writer was to give me more creative writing to do. The theory was if they gave me hard things, I'd get better at them. Turned out that didn't work too well. So we got to a point where I was working with these schools around Australia and New Zealand, and after about 2 years, the vast majority of those schools fell over. they weren't using the habits of mind anymore. I had one school, a beautiful school in Adelaide, where the students, a lovely girls' school, very compliant students, who, when the principal would talk about habits of mind, the girls would all go, "Oh, not again." They had used the language that frequently. They had taught the habits that often that the students actually got over it. And they said, "We know this now, move on." And within 2 or 3 years, most of those schools had dropped the ball and moved on. Do you have any things that you do in schools in Singapore where, it's great one year, but you move on the next? Does that happen in Singapore? It happens all over the world. But it didn't happen in all the schools that I worked with. In a few schools, we saw profound results. I had one school in Adelaide where they doubled the number of students in their upper growth band for literacy, from 20% of their students to 40% of their students. In the same school, in the same 3-year period, they increased the number of students in the upper growth band for numeracy from 20% to 35%. I had another school in Adelaide, Nudgee College, who after 5 years of working with habits of mind, had their best Year 12 results in decades. Waikiki, another example that we've mentioned. Some schools were seeing extraordinary improvements in student learning. Now, don't get me wrong, it's all about the student learning. It's not just about their exam results, but if we're not improving their exam results, we're doing something wrong. So I got very interested in what was the difference between the 9 out of 10 schools that said, "Thanks very much, not doing habits of mind anymore," and the 1 out of 10 schools that said, "This has been the most profound thing we have ever done." And it came down to the difference in one word. Now, if you are watching this in the background, you've got the webinar on, and you think, I'll just do my emails and I'll read a few things and mark a few papers while I watch, pay attention now. Because if you know nothing else about the habits of mind, this next point is everything you need to know. The difference between the schools that succeeded with habits of mind and those that left it behind was the difference between the words use and improve. The schools that failed with habits of mind asked the students to use the habits of mind. They told students that you need to manage your impulsivity, you should be persistent, you need to use these habits of mind. And invariably, after a couple of years, very, very little had changed for those schools. At schools like Westbourne Park Primary, Waikiki, Nudgee College and a whole bunch of others, Kerwin State High School, they didn't ask students to use the habits of mind. They asked the students to improve their habits of mind. It was no longer the student's responsibility to use them. It was the teacher's responsibility to teach those students to use the habits more effectively. And if you can use words like improve, develop, extend, build, mature, get better at these habits of mind, then you're a long way along the path of actually seeing significant improvements in student learning outcomes. And understanding that shift defined the difference between schools that, maybe had some language and it looked good, posters on the wall, and schools that actually saw improvements in student learning outcomes. And that's where this idea of learning agility came in. That once we started recognizing that the habits of mind on their own didn't do much. If it was just a labeling exercise, if we were teaching about the habits of mind, it didn't really make a difference. For the habits of mind to make a difference, we had to approach them with a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's work, and another big part of the work I'm doing with the Principals Academy. When you saw the habits of mind as static, as something some students had and some students did and other students needed to use, you saw very little change in their behaviour. But when you saw the habits of mind as something to develop, to improve, to extend, to build, to change these most basic characteristics, then you started seeing some really significant results. But only when that was also accompanied by this idea of stretch and challenge. And so I remind you about how Costa and Benekalik defined the habits of mind as. The habits of mind were defined as the dispositions that were skillfully and mindfully employed. Not just used, but used well by characteristically successful people when they were in their learning zone. And that's that work around virtuous practice. And if you've been to any of my workshops, the mindset workshop or the work I do around learning landscape, it's all about this idea of shift, of push, of stretch and challenge. So the tipping point for this work, the bit where it starts to make a real difference, is where you start focusing on developing the habits of mind. Not just using, but improving those habits. You're looking at that single sheet at the moment. You're looking at all those descriptions. You're going, these habits are good. The question you need to ask yourself is, what does it look like to get better at those habits of mind? You could line up your students from the student who's least able to manage their impulsivity to the student who's most able to do it. What's the difference? And importantly, what's your role as the teacher to help them get better at it? Now today, to answer that question in detail will take a long time, the whole course that we work through. But that's the question we need to answer. And to describe this perhaps in a bit more detail, I want to share this diagram with you. Again, for those of you who have been part of my growth mindset or my learning landscape workshops, you'll recognise this next diagram. Most of us have seen students improve like this, that they get better for a while they're in their comfort zone. Then they reach this plateau when they get to their performance zone. My question to you is, why is the bar set there? All right, think about this for a moment. Most students will improve and then stop improving. Perfectly normal part of learning. But why do some students stop improving at this level of difficulty and other students get to this level of difficulty and other students this level of difficulty? Excuse me, that's the question we're about to answer. And we're going to answer it by, again, doing a short little activity in the chat box. So get your keyboards ready. When I went to school, I got at the end of each term a report that had 2 grades on it. It had a grade for achievement, graded A to F. It had a grade for effort, graded A to F. So A is the best, F is the worst. Now, if Singapore was about to do this, if you were about to implement an assessment strategy in your school where you gave students a grade for achievement, A to F, or a grade for effort, A for F, what grade would you want to write on your students' reports? Would you want to write AA, A for achievement, A for effort? Or would you prefer to write, and these are the answers you're about to give me, A for achievement, F for effort? And can I just put in here, when I was a student, I thought this was my goal in life. To get A for achievement without doing all that hard work, that was the sign you were a genius. Or would you prefer to give them politely FA, or maybe not FA, but any grade, as long as the effort's the best, the A? Or would you prefer to give them an FF? Now in the chat box, I want to see come up, what would you like to give your students? AA, AF, FA, or any grade as long as the effort's an A, or an FF? Let's have a look what comes up in the chat box as I glance across here. So I can see Sarah has straight away said AA, FA, AA, AA or FA. So as long as the A for effort, AF. Oh, who said AF? Edwin has said AF. Edwin, are you in my other group? FA, AA. I know there's 70 or 80 of us or more on the course, so I'm going to wait for 70 or 80 results to come up. Oh, come on, there's got to be a few more people that want to put a couple of answers in there. There we go. AF, AF, good, good. AF. Good, AA. Beautiful. Can I tell you, please, and please keep them coming, AA, good, good, good. I honestly believe that the result you should be looking for from your students is AF. Because I want you to make them so very, very smart that reaching that standard is easy. Let me explain what I mean. Let's look at that graph again and try and understand why, as we get better in our comfort zone, it's easy. When we look at this, here we go, and I'll go in here, whoops. When you're in your comfort zone, you're well within your current abilities. When you're doing what I call easy things you haven't done yet. When you're in your performance zone, you'll reach the peak of your abilities. You're using everything you've got to get to this standard. When you go into your learning zone, it's beyond your current abilities. Right? When you stretch and challenge yourself, it goes beyond your current abilities. And when you understand that, we get to understand this. Let me put this on here. Do that and do this. Get the buttons right. This student here, now I'll make it full size. This student here is going to get AF. The standard, the difficulty, the complexity that's being taught is beyond their current abilities. They can put everything they've got into achieving, but they're going to fail because their abilities aren't up to it. This might be like taking one of your 8-year-olds and giving them 16-year-old work. They're not going to be able to do it. They're going to fail. But then, on the other hand, this student here, standard has remained the same. This is the standard we expect at a given year level. This student's going to get AA. They're going to put their best effort in and reach the standard. But it's this student that I want to get to. This student is operating at such a high level that the standard we're asking of them is easy for them. And so, the way I want you thinking is that when you see a student struggling, the answer is they're not smart enough to do it. And what you need to do is to teach them to behave so incredibly intelligently that they're able to do it easily. And here's a little hint. The habits of mind were originally called intelligent behaviors. They're the behaviors that make hard things easy. Now stick with me for a minute because I know some of you are going, I don't understand. I'm going to get there. I was working with a principal recently here in Melbourne and I was walking around his school with him. And we were talking about his students and approaching the end of year exams for our year 12s, which is our final year of school. And he said, James, our students are going to find the year 12 exams easy. I went, excuse me? He said, yeah, the exams are going to be so easy for our students. And I said, I've got a lot of schools I work with that would love to know how you're making the exams so easy for your students. And he said, James, it's like this. Year 12 expects this standard from them. And our students 3 years ago were at this standard. 2 years ago, we got them to this standard. A year ago, they were here. Now they're working at such a high standard that the year 12 standard is a doddle for them. It's easy for them. And so the key here is to recognise that to succeed at increasingly difficult tasks requires increasingly mature habits of mind. You need to learn to behave more intelligently. And that's what we do when we develop students' habits of mind. We teach them how to behave more intelligently, and the things that they used to find hard become easy. And when we work with the habits of mind with that way of thinking, it changes the way, whoops, I beg your pardon, I'll come back a step. It changes the way we approach teaching and learning in our classroom. I mentioned Kerwin State High School a little while ago as one of the schools that have embraced habits of mind. And I've got a quick little interview here with Karen Watson, who's one of the teachers there. And I want you to listen to the way she describes the way she works with the habits of mind. How she identifies that the students are working at this level with the habit of mind, but she wants them at this level, and how that changes the way she teaches. Here's Karen.
I've used one particular habit with my year 8s. I used managing impulsivity for a poetry unit that I did, and at the start of the unit the kids were all about how this was just, you know, not calling out, but I wanted them to manage their impulsivity in terms of their responses, not to say the first thing that came into their head, to really think thoughtfully and reflectively before they answered in a test situation. And that happened. The habit of mind forced me to choose specific strategies. I just really enjoyed working with that. It changed my perception of how things were developed and delivered, and the students, their results improved, but they really improved in the practice of that habit of mind. They have a deeper understanding of that, and I know that they will transfer that to other situations.
What the habits of mind did for Karen's classroom was forced her to think about how she teaches the students to behave more intelligently. They used to behave this way. If I wanted them to reach this standard, I had to teach them to think differently. And I love the way Karen almost apologises for the improvement in student learning. She said their exam results improved, but they really improved in the way they engage in the habit of mind. And I know they'll take that to other parts of their life. And this is what Mrs. Charles was talking about at the start of the session, that I'm interested in helping create thoughtful students, not just exam smart, not just being able to answer the questions and do that sort of thing, but to be able to transfer that to other parts of their life. That doesn't mean they're not going to get good exam results. They will. If you're not getting better exam results, test results, in success in schools, then you're doing it wrong. But it will be more than that. These aren't study techniques. These are learning to behave more intelligently. If any of you came to my learning landscape workshop yesterday, I described the habits of mind as the tools we use to climb these mountains of expertise. And the beauty is, once you've got those tools, once you've developed your habits of mind, once you've filled your backpack up, you can climb all these different mountains of expertise. Think about someone that you've met who's been highly successful in one area, who's really, really good at something. They're pretty good at a lot of things, aren't they? And that's because they've developed their habits of mind. Now, of course, it doesn't stop there. The course that we're offering through Principals Academy will show you how to develop students' habits of mind, teach them how to behave more intelligently, how to weave that into your curriculum program. But the schools that really saw a change in student performance and school culture went a step beyond that. They also nourished the habits of mind through the policies and practices of the schools. One school I'm thinking of, Westbourne Park Primary, it became so much a fabric of the school that when the time came for the principal who had introduced habits of mind to move on, he was retiring, the school community made it compulsory that the next principal who came in had to support the habits of mind. They weren't going to have anybody come in and say, oh, that was something the last principal did, we're doing something different. The community held on to the habits of mind as being so important that they had to keep doing it. The parents, the teachers, the students all recognised the impact the habits of mind were having on the students' learning. And ultimately, these communities end up living the habits of mind. And I've got another little interview here I'd like to share with you from Meredith Wenter, who's also now the principal at Curwen State High School. And I'll let her tell her story, and then we'll come back.
I think what's wonderful about habits of mind is that it's not just something that you teach students, but it's actually something that you take on yourself, and it can really make a difference in your own life. And I don't think that unless you actually have taken on the habits yourself and that you're very practiced at them, then I don't think that you will be successful in teaching these to students. And I think Art said something, or James said something yesterday that really resonated with me when he said that when he went to the Waikiki School, which is a school that was founded using the habits of mind, that what the teachers said was they talked about three things. The first thing they talked about was how they used the habits themselves in their own lives and how that had made a difference for them, how they use them in the way they work in the school and their decision making, in the way they meet, in the sort of award ceremonies they have and those sorts of things. And then they talked about how the students use them. And I thought, well, that is really important, because that means then that as teachers, they're growing as learners as well as growing as teachers. And I think that's a very valuable thing for teachers to have in their lives. So.
And that's a true story. When I visited Waikiki School 10, 15 years ago now, and I stopped teachers, the first thing invariably they said was, these habits of mind are so important to me. When you look at these habits of mind, they're not just kids' stuff. They apply just as much to us as adults, as lifelong learners, as they do to students. I remember clearly there's been a few times where something like this has happened. But that school I was talking about in Adelaide, with the girls got over the habits of mind. I was working with them, and one of the leaders at the school was working through one of the activities, and she just got very consumed for a few minutes, and she stopped and she was thinking and she was looking around the room, and just obviously something had twigged with her. And she stopped the room. She stood up and said, James, I just need to stop. I've had an epiphany. She said, James, I've just realised that we can't, as a school, start working with these habits of mind until we start reflecting and developing our own habits of mind first. If we want to improve our standard of teaching, our standard of life, we need to be focused on developing and improving our own habits of mind as well. I've got another little video for you. This one from a school in New Zealand, and I've shared it with you today to give you an idea of the type of impact that working with the habits of mind can have, not just on student learning, not just on the teachers, but on the culture of the school.
What have the habits of minds done for St Margaret's? Basically, they've done a lot, mostly bridged the gap between the students and the teachers, so that they're both learners. So the teachers aren't the fountain of all knowledge anymore, but the teachers are learners as well. They're learning about habits of mind, and they can be a beginner in some of the habits and more advanced in others as well. So it's provided a vehicle for teachers and students to both be seen as learners. It's also given us a shared language. So when some teachers say that they did teach persisting, but they didn't call it that, and they say they did teach risk-taking, but they didn't call it that, we've decided to keep the shared language so that it actually becomes part of the culture of the school. So we're a school that's rich in traditions, and we have a lot of things that carry all the way through across all the year groups, and Habits of Mind is one of those now. And yeah, so it's a vehicle for learning across year groups seamlessly. That's our aim, to have the seamless integration from the primary school all the way through to the secondary school.
So, as you can see, when we nourish the habits of mind through practices, through policy, and when the community starts to live the habits of mind, we can see some really quite profound changes in the focus the school has, not just on what students are learning, but on how they are learning. And as I've told you this story over the last half hour or so, it started just with me in my classroom going, how do I do this? And I did it badly. To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't recommend the path I personally took, introducing habits of mind to my school, to anybody else. I did a bad job of it, learned from my mistakes, and moved forward from there. But we learned a lot. That critical piece of learning about shifting from using and teaching about the habits of mind, requiring the habits of mind in our curriculum, to improving, developing the habits of mind, helping students get better at the way they engaged in it. In the course that we're going to run next year, we talk about how we describe and develop habits of mind in our students. And we've continued to learn. Where we are today is so much richer and has so many more strengths and benefits for you than we had back in the early 90s and early 2000s. And one of the tools that we've now developed, and I'm so thrilled with this, is we've developed what we call the Habits of Mind profile tool. We've developed an app that will allow you to take a snapshot to assess your students' current level of development with the habits of mind. One of the profound things about the Habits of Mind profile tool is it allows you to do that at the start of learning. Most of the assessment tools we've developed to date with the Habits of Mind sort of look at how did you apply your habits of mind when you get to the end of the topic. This one says, this is your level of development today, and then allows you to ask the question, is that good enough for tomorrow? And if it's not, to set some goals, specific targets for development of the habits of mind. This tool changes everything. And as part of the Habits of Mind course, you get a chance to play with this in your own classroom. It's a product we sell to schools to use across their school if they want, but you'll get to play with it in your own classroom. And as I say, it allows you to assess and help students developing their habits of mind. I'll show you briefly what it looks like. Do that, and then I'll do this. Habits of Mind profile tool walks you through a series of questions and eventually allows you to get this sort of map of how well developed your habits of mind are. Now, this is really exciting on so many levels, and the schools, I think that's 3 errors I've made today in technology. The schools that have been trialling this for us, and it's all new, have just found it extremely powerful. It allows you to track the student across year levels to watch their development of the habit of mind, and gives you the sorts of insights that allows you to pinpoint the sorts of interventions that teachers, students and parents need to focus on to help that student learn. You can do it as a 360-degree evaluation, so the student contributes, the teacher contributes, and potentially a parent contributes as well. This tool is an absolute game changer and something that I'm really excited to share with you. I want to share just 1 or 2 other things with you before we start wrapping up, but I noticed that Miss Charles has put a note in the chat box asking you to put any questions that you've got please, this is a limited amount of time. It is so valuable. I will give you what I can in the time that we have. So if you have a question, if you've got something that's bouncing around in your head that you'd like me to address about the habits of mind, put them in the chat, in the question box, which is down the middle here somewhere. Miss Charles will get to it in a few minutes, and then we'll start answering those questions. But if you do decide to go down this path, the resource that I offered you before about how to get started with habits of mind will be a great way to get started. It just outlines some of the key ideas around development, around learning agility, around how to infuse the habits of mind into school culture. And then I'd invite you to come and join us as part of this Habits of Mind, Succeeding with Habits of Mind course that we're going to do. And what we're going to do in that course, like if you've been part of the Growth Mindset course or you're thinking about doing the Learning Landscape course, we've got a series of webinars supported by a significant, really significant online resource. And so each week we come together, I go through some key ideas, then you go into the online resource, you do the learning there, we come back, we discuss what we've learned and cover the next topic. So we're going to move through where the habits of mind fit in the curriculum. We're going to become more familiar with them. You might be looking at those habits of mind now and looking at it going, what's finding humour about? Like, what is that habit? Or what's metacognition? We'll answer all those questions. You'll then get a chance to use this habits of mind profile tool to take that snapshot of your own habits of mind and apply it to your classroom as well. We'll look at that understanding of growth. We talk about these 5 dimensions of growth, a way of understanding what improvement, development, growth of the habits of mind actually look like in a classroom and how to facilitate that in your school. We start looking at the habits of mind as outcomes. You remember when I took you through that ladder before, there's a lot of schools that required the habits of mind. Like my teachers, the English teachers required me to think creatively, imaginatively and innovatively. But they didn't know how to teach me how to be good at it. I'll show you how to shift from the habits of mind being something I want students to do to something I teach students to do well, to make that development of the habit of mind a learning outcome. We're going to talk about how to use the backwards design process, Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe's work, to infuse the habits of mind into your curriculum design and assessment work. Then we'll talk about how to introduce the habits of mind to students. Now, I want to stress this. If you're going, I've got enough from today, I reckon I can do this on my own, I'm going to go and teach my students the habits of mind. Stop. Stop. Please stop. I don't mind you doing this on your own. By all means, go. I mean, I think we can do it better together. But teaching the habits of mind to students isn't the place to start. Teaching the habits, getting in there, doing what comes naturally to teachers and saying, these are the habits of mind, they're important, this is what they mean, is easy and straightforward, and there are so many resources out there to help you do it. The hard part is the second step. The hard part is knowing what to do after you've introduced them and taught them. And I've seen so many schools rush into the easy part, the putting the posters up, teaching the language, doing those sort of things, only to find that everything falls over when you haven't got the second part. And finally, if there are schools that want to take a whole school approach, reach out to Joseph at the Principals Academy or myself. We've got a whole school package where I have spent significant time and resources interviewing school leaders from around the world who have implemented habits of mind successfully, learning their lessons, listening to their examples, working out how to do it, the best practice from around the world. And we've got a bunch of resources around that as a separate resource if you're interested. And that's the interviews with the experts. So it is just coming up to 5 minutes to the hour. I can see that Joseph has put in the links to the Learning Landscape and the Succeeding with Habits of Mind courses. If you've got specific questions, by all means, email me or Joseph. And Miss Charles, did we get many questions from participants today?
Yes, I think we've got some really interesting questions.
I love interesting
Some
questions.
about how it works, and also whether it works in certain special situations. All right. So first of all, it was, how do we convince people that this is the right thing to do?
Can I tell you, you think this is going to be hard,
Yeah.
but it is so easy to convince
Okay.
people to get on board with this. When I started this work, I was teaching here in Victoria, and we'd just come out of what we called CSF 1, which was our Curriculum Framework 1. And we're starting to do Curriculum Framework 2. We had a change of government, and we went into what was called VELS, the Victorian Essential Learning Standards. So over about 5 years, we'd had 3 curriculum documents to work from. And I came in and said, I think we should do Habits of Mind. And teachers just went, no, James, we're busy enough. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's exactly what's facing local teachers here. Yeah.
Absolutely. But then we did this, and this is just such an easy thing to do. I said, right, fine, give me 45 minutes in a staff meeting. And I gave the curriculum documents out to the different faculties in the school. And I said, go through these documents and pull out all the thinking verbs, all the things they're asking us to do with these students, not the specific moment in history or the specific piece of knowledge in science, but the way we go about learning about it, the thinking behind it. They spent 10 or 15 minutes doing that, and we came up with about 300 post-it notes with these words on it. I then said, right, up on the walls here, I've just put these 16 habits of mind. Can you see if you can find a home for your 300 post-it notes on those 16 habits of mind?
Huh?
Invariably, and I've done this activity with lots of schools now, all those words disappeared onto the 16 habits of mind and one other space. Because the curriculum documents, the people who designed them, they wanted your students to be critical thinkers, to be effective thinkers. But they used words like collaboration, group work, teamwork, getting along, these sorts of ideas, which is all just different ways of saying thinking interdependently. They wanted students to stick at tasks, to find alternatives, to not give up, which is just another way of saying persisting. And what we actually did is we took this massive collection, 3 curriculum documents, and distilled it down into 16 key ideas plus one other poster. The other poster that came up were about values, honesty, trustworthy, and things like that. So to get buy-in, you've just got to show teachers that we're already doing it. Right? This is not new. Smart teachers, well-informed curriculum designers have always developed students' habits of mind. What we're doing is adding clarity and specificity around what we're doing. And when they start going, oh, that sounds good, just remind them that when the next curriculum document comes in, and there'll be another one, you can transition straight into it. You're already doing what they asked. So it works really well.
Will it also work for jaded students? Students have also had it with always being told, do this, do that.
When it comes to that engagement question, if I could answer that question really well, I'd be charging more. But seriously, I can't solve, this is not a magic bullet. There are no strategies, single strategies that are magic bullets. Those jaded students, it might be a mindset issue. If that student is not engaging because they've failed and failed and failed, they said, I can't do it, that's a mindset issue. If the student is jaded because I don't know how to do it, then this might help. Certainly it will help students see more progress by focusing on how they're learning, not just what they're learning. And that in itself is motivating. But yeah, if I could solve the problems of all the jaded students, yeah, we'd be
You'd
having
be a
another
millionaire.
conversation.
Yes. There was a serious question from schools that have been obliged to go into distance learning because of this pandemic. And as a result, there would be some mental health issues. How would HOM help?
Yeah, look, again, I'm not sure I can help directly with the mental health issues, but I can help more broadly with well-being, and I can help with the connection between home and school, because one of the challenges for distance learning is, of course, every parent has suddenly found out what it's like to be a teacher, haven't they? And hasn't that been fun for some of them? They thought they knew what we did, and suddenly they realised that, oh, yeah, those teachers, they work hard.
Yeah.
Um, one of the really powerful things that the Habits of Mind do is give a shared language and a shared focus between not just the teacher and the student, but between home and student. And when we share that common language, when we can talk to the student, mum and teacher, using the same words, like Art said in the opening video, it has a really very, very profound effect. So it's not going to solve all your distance education issues, but not just for distance education, but for education generally. Having that shared language, that shared approach to what we're doing is very, very powerful.
Yes. I think that also answers the other question that someone said, do we always have to use HOM language? But I think, like you say, it must be something that's shared, right? So that everybody understands.
That question might also have asked, because I hear that type of question a lot, do we have to use that specific language? The answer is no. There are no habits of mind police. No one's going to come along and say, no, you must say managing impulsivity. You can change the language if you want. The only thing I would suggest is that if you're going to change the language, keep it consistent. So you use the same language all the time. Sometimes I find early primary teachers say, these words are too complicated. Can we use simpler words? And my answer to that is twofold. If I can teach a 5-year-old to say Tyrannosaurus Rex, I can teach them to say metacognition. So you don't need to change the language. I've seen lots of 5-year-olds and 3-year-olds using this language. But if you do insist, if you do really want to change it, I would keep the habits of mind there and attach your simpler language, your simplified language to that. Because at some stage as they move through school, they're going to graduate to the more mature language, and you want that to be a clear, easy transition, not, oh, we used to say this, now we say that. So.
There is the next question is whether peer coaching works with HOM.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, look, peer coaching is a part of it. It's not the whole answer. I have a school I work with in Sydney who is using peer coaching as one of their sort of corner pieces. It's one of the things they hold dear. And we're working with them now around weaving the habits of mind into that process. So the reason this happens, by the way, you could ask me about peer coaching, you could ask me about accelerated learners or about gifted learners or about anybody else. And the habits of mind are always going to fit because they're not a good idea. Because when they were identified as what successful people do when they're in the business of getting better. They're real. You could call them different names, but this is what legitimately happens when people are improving. So other people have tried to do it in different ways, and there are different collections of something that are kind of similar to the habits of mind out there. My experience has been that Art Costa and Bennett Kalik's habits capture that set more clearly, more distinctly than anybody else's. Sometimes people come along and say, oh, James, 16 are too many. Can we have fewer? And my answer is, there's a couple of 100 elements on the periodic table. It would be a lot easier if there were fewer, but there's not. Like, it just is. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
Sometimes, look, to be honest, if they were my habits of mind, I would divide a few of them. All right. What Art Koster and Bennett Kalick did was describe this space of what it takes to be successful, and they divided it up into 16 boxes.
Right.
For me, managing impulsivity, I would split into 2 habits.
I see.
Managing impulsivity is a little bit of the, urgent rush sort of stuff, and it's also the long-term planned, deliberate sort of action. And I think they're different enough that I would split them.
Okay.
And I think thinking flexibly and creating imaginatively are similar enough that I would make them the same. You can do that if you want.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah. But, the other thing that I think a lot of schools face is a constantly changing staff, because staff move in, staff go out. And so it gets very frustrating to the school leader. Here am I have prepared this, everybody is now speaking the same language, and then oops, at the end of the school year, 2 or 3 move out, 2 or 3 new ones move in. How do I get that kind of sufficient stability?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to that question. First off, when I sort of went up that ladder before, the first part was about developing, but the next part was nurturing through policy and practice. So the schools that have succeeded all have, at some way, shape or form, some sort of induction program. Some program that says, this is how we do it around here, this is our common language. They have a similar sort of thing for parents as well, like the information pack that goes to parents that says, this is how we do it here. So there's that part of it. But also from the incoming teacher's perspective, to walk into a school like Waikiki, for example, where students are using that language, where teachers are using that language, it actually softens your transition in because, oh, this is the way we do it here. And it's interesting, I said earlier on that I wouldn't suggest the way I did it. I made some mistakes and I've learned from them, and I'd suggest something better for you. But one of the insights that I did have is that I was the middle years curriculum leader, so the 12 to 15-year-olds. And we got habits of mind really working in there, and it was fantastic. But I couldn't get into the upper secondary part. The year 10, 11 and 12s, they were too busy, they weren't interested. And I said, okay, too hard for me. Let's stick with the middle school. Until the students that I taught in the middle school that had adopted the habits of mind, that were using the language, that were behaving differently, moved into the senior school. And what happened then is that teachers went, all these students are using this common language. That's really good. And they're actually behaving differently to last year's students. And they came to me and said, James, how do I do habits of mind now?
Right.
So with that new teacher that comes into the school,
Right.
they're going to walk into a school where they see it working, and they're going to say, how do I do this? This works.
There's another question in that we will have diverse students. Are there some students that by nature take to habits of mind better than others?
Not by nature.
Uh-huh.
That's a mindset issue that we could
Yes.
talk about. But certainly, if you look at the profile, like if you take a profile of each of your students using the profile tool I talked about, they're going to be very, very different. And they're going to be very different because of the past experience of the student. Some of them have been taught differently, had different experiences, etc., etc., etc. But what you've got to realise as you approach this work is that the level of development of your students' habits of mind, let's take a 10-year-old, for example. You might have a 10-year-old that is flying along. Their habits of mind are really well developed for a 10-year-old. When you move them up into 11-year-old work, 12-year-old work, 13-year-old work, if the habits of mind don't keep developing, then they're going to start falling behind. So no matter what your profile is at the moment for those students, it's actually pretty low. they're not capable of doing the high level adult work that we need them to be capable of. So over the course of schooling, all of our students are going to have to develop all of their habits of mind.
Right.
And in my mindset work, I talk about how strengths are relative, not absolute. You might have a strength in creating, imagining, innovating today, but you want to keep developing that, but you also want to develop the others, so your profile will change over time.
Okay. And somebody asked whether if they had to choose between habits of mind and the learning landscape, which one would they choose? I think you might want to tell them the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. You would choose to do the learning landscape first and then do habits of mind.
Mhm.
What I often find, in fact, you'd probably do mindset, then learning landscape,
Mhm.
then habits of mind.
I think.
And the reason for that is that the habits of mind won't work unless you start with a growth mindset, right? If you don't get you have to teach them to behave more intelligently.
Mhm.
That's the foundation part. That's the learning agility, the base part of it. The learning landscape then engages students in the learning process, understanding the nature of challenge, the challenge pits that I was talking about yesterday, and those sorts of ideas. The habits of mind are the hard part in terms of once you understand you're capable of growth, stepping into your learning zone, stretching and challenging yourself, well, you do that. But knowing how to develop your habits of mind when you're stretched and challenged so you can improve, that's the more complicated part, the more the part that will hold it all together, I suppose,
True.
on the foundation of mindset. So that's the order I would do it in, and the reason we're presenting it in the order we are.
Right. Thank you, James. I think those are. Oh no, there is some more question. Is habits of mind more effective in earlier years, like the primary school?
Look, that's one of those questions. Is it more effective? I find that in primary schools in general, because they're smaller, because they have more flexibility over what they do and how they use their time, it's easier to get things started. So in that sense, there's a different set of strategies to implement in primary than in secondary. But I'd be reluctant to say they're more or less effective. They're going to be effective in both contexts.
It's just that it's easier when they are younger.
It is. And it's the same with anything. If you can
Right.
establish those dispositions and the understanding of improving them in young children, they've got a head start. But I would be very careful to make sure that the secondary teachers didn't go, oh, this is the primary teacher's responsibility. Those students should have these habits by the time they get to us. It doesn't work like that. We've got to continue to develop it.
Right. Okay. Really, the last question.
Last.
I think so. It is, would you recommend gamification when conducting habits of mind? Introducing games. Yes.
Yeah, always. I think gamification, when used appropriately, is a great strategy.
Okay.
And I certainly, if the kids, like I said, the habits of mind are real. You look at top gamers, you are going to see them demonstrating these habits of mind in what they do. And so to convince the kids that to be good at this, you've got to develop these habits of mind. And also to be good at your academics and your sport, and you have to be,
Yeah.
it becomes a no-brainer.
We just wish that their game skills were transferred to their academics. It isn't
Well, once
always.
they can identify them, that's one of the great strengths,
Right.
is that a lot of people just go, oh, this is what I do. Once you give them that cognitive anchor, the way of describing and labeling and analysing, think of that profile tool. This is why I'm good at what I do, and this is what will make me good at this.
Right.
It gives them that ability to reflect, and transfer happens after that.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. Well, thank you very much, James. I think this has been a wonderful session. It's
Thank you.
given us a look into what habits of mind are and the promise they have for developing our students, our school language, our whole school culture. Thank you again. And thank you to all our
Absolute pleasure.
participants for participating in such an active way. I
Thank
think
you,
there
everyone.
is, thank you everybody. And I think there is, as always, an evaluation. So, right, I think Joseph will take over and talk a bit about this.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Charles. Thank you, James. As the participants exit from the Zoom room, they will be directed to a browser to submit their evaluation for the session. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
And we see everybody. We're going to close this room now and have a great day ahead. Thank you very much.
That was good, James.
Thanks. Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. Like I said, it's like my favourite child.
Okay, then.